My first question would be like, what, in your professional opinion, is social anxiety if it were to be defined? That's
Definitely saw that one. That's a loaded question, obviously. The best way I would define it from a, if I was talking with a client, maybe not clinically, but it's basically the inability to be able to function, whether it's with another person or environmentally, whether that's with another person environmentally or just in their own environment. Okay, so that would be the difference between, that would include like making a phone call. Okay, I might have social anxiety giving a phone call. So even though I'm talking to a physical phone object, um, if that person answers at the other end, I have to talk to them, and that might cause anxiety. And that's still a social element to it. But I could also be on the outside, even on the computer, with anxiousness, going, oh, I have to contact this person by email. And that still could be an anxiety too, even though it's not a direct physical contact socially with that person, if that makes sense. So,
yes.
yeah, so that's kind of the best way I can describe it in that way without going deeper. So,
All right. Okay. What are some common symptoms and telling signs of social anxiety?
definitely just anxiousness, as far as a lot of people feel tightness of chest, butterflies in the stomach, could even be headaches. It's just the inability to function within what we would call that social norm of people. So maybe not being able to make that phone call, not being able to go out in public and be with people, having, and ultimately that term goes back to isolating. So even when we look at what's called personality theory, whether a person traditionally from a, like, old school terminology, if someone's an introvert or extrovert, it doesn't matter. They just, when they're around people or a person, they have to hide, they have to run, they have to isolate themselves. And I do believe that there is healthy isolation, like maybe being contemplative, going for a hike in the forest, thinking about life, all that kind of stuff. But then there's the old man hermit, I'm going to get off my property, I'm going to get you. That's
Hmm.
unhealthy isolation.
Hmm.
That's someone who probably deals with a huge amount of social anxiety.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Under what circumstances might a person develop social anxiety?
I would say ultimately it's hurts and harms that have been done to the person. And that again could be whether it's through social media, whether it's through actual physical, so bullying, could be maybe parenting trauma. All right, there's a thing called ACEs, depending on how much adversity in their background they've had. Oftentimes, it doesn't surprise me, they deal with anxiety. So,
Hmm.
and that includes, again, introvert, extrovert. So,
All right. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. What are some ways that come to mind where social anxiety can worsen for a person who is already going through it?
Say that again.
What are some ways that come to your mind where social anxiety can worsen for a person who is already going through it?
Yeah. Well, continually doing what they're doing. Okay. So, inactivity is a huge factor. Sometimes just having to get up and to move forward is still an action. It's an event, it's a motion that can help begin to break that cycle of anxiety. But then the question is how do I actually get up and do that? You
Hmm.
know, and that's sometimes in my world, that's where counseling can come in. It's, as simple as maybe visualizing, maybe working through what that hurt is. What is that deeper primary emotion that that person's dealing with in order to go, oh, yeah, I'm actually just really scared. I'm going to be rejected by that person. Fair enough. All right. Those kind of concepts. Also, isolation again is a big, huge factor. I don't have friends, well, I kind of have friends. Oh, I got 350 people on Facebook, if they're on Facebook anymore.
Hmm.
Well, great. How many are actually close? If you were in trouble, if you were stuck on a desert island with one phone call, who could you actually call to help you? Nobody. Okay, you're isolated. You're double
Yes.
isolated, especially if you're on an island. So,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. What are some factors that may drive a person to feel inferior to another person? Are there any common factors or do they vary for every individual?
I think that probably comes down to vulnerability and again, what past hurts have happened to someone. If I've been hurt by someone with someone in a beard with curly hair, I'm not talking about you, but maybe that might be something that, might cause me a little more anxiety to go, oh, I don't know if I can trust this person.
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to that trust, that relationship, and that if I have been hurt that way, I'm going to have anxiety about that. There's an old phrase that goes, once bitten, twice shy, and especially in today's age,
Mhm.
with, gosh, it depends too, with offense and hurts, all that stuff can stop someone from, again, being mobile in their activity with social connection. And instead they become immobile in their social connection. Actually, Facebook should be called immobile, you know.
Mhm.
There, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down for myself. That was a good one. The new immobile phone system.
Yeah. Yeah. But here I was speaking of feeling inferior to another person, like, okay, I'm lesser than this person. What
Yeah.
what might cause somebody to think of themselves that way?
In my world, it's called a therapeutic imbalance of power. Okay. Um, if you have an imbalance of power, another word for that is power differential. That can very easily create a social anxiety regarding someone feeling less than other. If I'm standing above you, if I'm, there's a thing like where handshakes, right? Depending on which way a handshake is done, can determine. I've literally had people who are insecure, but they've learned that if I go this way, it means I'm in control. Yeah. So, for example, like if I'm a corporate guy and I'm going to learn how to communicate with people, I want to be the one, because of my insecurity, to be the one in power. All right.
Yeah.
That's that power differential. So, I've literally met people who I know they think or maybe they are even in a authoritarian standpoint. Okay. They'll shake their hand this way rather than this way. That's more of a submissive act, right? Rather than an equal, neutral middle handshake,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. So
Yes.
that's all about power differential.
Yeah.
And if someone is continually bombarded with that throughout their whole life, very easily they can view themselves as insignificant, not worthy. Even though everyone else tells them, man, you got so much skill and talent. Doesn't matter. If their core inner belief system believes that they're stupid, that they're no good, doesn't matter. You know, it could be as simple as just a childhood situation, being told or whatever happened to them in their child, going, you're not good, or too many expectations. All of that leads to consequences that we ultimately will find ways, Mohammed, to be able to, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's how we cope with it.
Yeah.
And this is the issue that I deal with in my work, all right, is that if someone's dealing with, let's say, inferiority complex, all right, what may have worked with them as a 7-year-old, a 14-year-old, man, that is just not working as a 24, 34, 40-year-old,
Yeah.
because it's a different world. It's a different game. What worked as 7-year-old, now, oh my gosh, now I'm entering in a world of divorce, my own kids, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's fair. That's okay. What are your thoughts on social media websites and applications?
I view social media website and applications as neutral. However, based on humanity, all right, from a social perspective or a social sciences perspective, um, overall, what is meant for good has turned out to be very bad. There has been some very negative ramifications. However, there are some great value to it. I just think what we all perceived and thought things would be even 20 years ago to now, we're seeing a whole different level of consequence out of that. Better connection, better emails, texting. Now it's almost too much information that is
Yeah,
creating more disorganization and less communication, which is so ironic.
that's true. That's true. How important do you think they are for young people today, these social media websites and applications?
Uh, yeah, it has become the newest trend. It's become the newest thing to do. It's a part of life. There was the Facebook meme, about
Yeah.
3 years ago, where you have, back in my day, I read a book, and now you have this little 2-year-old going, hey, this isn't working. I'm swiping. What's going on? It's not working. No, you have to flip the page. And so it's just a change in how we are doing it. But I think because the rapidness of growth in technology that's happened in the last 20, 25 years, I think we haven't been able to adapt that to raising our kids in the way they
Hmm.
should go.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Do you believe it is possible to lead a successful life in today's world without having a social media account?
Yes, it is always possible,
Okay,
but definitely there are consequences of that action either way, whether you choose to have it or not have it.
of course.
I use my industry for itself. I personally know two counselors who have counseled for over 18 years, actually three. And no, two. I'll say two because the other one has kind of a website. But the other two have not had a website in 18 years that they've practiced, and they were overflowed. They had to turn people. I actually got clients from them because of it.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
know it's possible to do business and to conduct it, but that means actually talking with people, networking, meeting people, where it's way easier to send an email. Hey, do you want to do my business? Well, if not, it's very easy to say no.
Yes,
So yeah. So that's just one example, just as far as my thing. So yeah, it is possible.
of course. Okay. Okay. Do you think the excessive use of social media exacerbates feelings of incompetence, inferiority, self-consciousness, embarrassment, humiliation? Could you elaborate on that? If you think, what are your
I,
thoughts on that?
I think again, it's neutral. It's
Uh-huh.
how it's perceived and what is being projected, what that person is either allowing themselves to be projected with or what other people are projecting onto them. Because I could
Hmm.
say the same thing in just you and I talking if we were physically meeting each other. If you're coming down on me, you're no good. I'm a bully. I'm gonna beat you up because I have my own insecurity. Well, the cycle carries on, you
Yeah.
know. But I still have my own choice, and that's of course depending on your questioning. That's the advent in the work I do. The biggest issue as far as social media is either cyberbullying or internet pornography, which is a self-conscious choice to view stuff that people know shouldn't be viewed, but it creates then an addiction.
All right. All right. Do you think comparison culture, the culture of comparing your life with another person's, do you think it reinforces the idea that validation of someone's life can only be sought from the evaluation of others?
Yeah, it definitely can be. It can definitely reinforce that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're using it to compare, absolutely. We as human beings, that's half the work I do is people comparing themselves to other people and not taking their own responsibility, their own initiative, what they need to deal with. It's easier to blame. So why not compare and check out other people's sites and go, oh, I'm way better than them, or oh wow, they're so much better than me. I suck. I need to do more posting. And that can create a feeding frenzy of insecurity.
Yes. Yes. That's fair. What sort of pressures, in your opinion, do these young people feel when they're making these sort of social media posts where they're showing off a certain image of themselves?
Yeah, that's just depending on where you want to go with that question. It's just that persona of image that they're trying to project themselves. And that can be good, that can be bad. Again, it's neutral. It's going to determine where that person's at in their life as to how that's going to be projected. I could easily be completely lying to you right now, but everything I've said, and this is not really a shirt and black jacket. Underneath it is I don't know, a black t-shirt with I hate myself on it, but you're not going to know that because of my image of professionalism that I'm presenting to you right now.
Of course, of course.
So
Yeah,
and it's the old fashioned rock star syndrome. Everyone looks good on the album cover. Everyone looks good on the whatever on their
yeah,
site. But
yeah.
what's their inside life like? That's what I'm more worried about than what
Yes,
the outside projection is,
of
because
course.
everyone could fake it. Everyone's got their Mercedes Benz and yet are super broke, you know? Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. For someone with social anxiety, what type of effect do you think these images of projected perfection have on their emotional state?
It just reinforces it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. It just reinforces a false belief system that if I don't do or look a certain way, I have to, again, another old fashioned term, I have to keep up with the Joneses. I
Mm-hmm.
have to keep up with everything and follow with that pattern of what everyone else is doing, rather than actually being an independent person who makes a choice in how I want to do what I want to do.
Yes. Okay. Okay. And again, what effect do you think this comparison culture has on a young person's sense of identity? And does it in any way feed their social anxiety? You did say that. You did answer that
Yeah,
already. But
yeah.
in terms of if having an effect on their sense of identity, do you think it does have any effect?
Oh, yeah, absolutely it has an effect. Yeah,
How
because
so?
again, it just reinforces it, or it
Okay.
has the potential to reinforce it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Okay. So, in lieu of appearing perfect and happy, many young people choose to hide and suppress their unhappy thoughts and feelings. Do you agree with this, and why? And how do you think this suppression affects their emotional health?
That's a deeper question for me
Uh
because
huh.
because specifically your question is relying to younger individuals. We'll say the teenager. So
Uh,
that's
like not teenagers, even young adults, like up to the age of like 30 or 35. That's
oh
my age.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I think seeing the work, some of the work that I do, I work with a lot of what I call milestones. All
Okay.
right. So how media is going to affect a 2-year-old can be very different from the 14-year-old who's developing the back of the brain and hasn't had the prefrontal cortex developed yet, because this is all emotion centered. And so
Hmm.
that's why teenagers are so emotionally, and this part here, which is our logic and reasoning, that's why teenagers are super impulsive. So, whereas a 30-year-old, this part here, the tectonic plates have all fused, this is how I am, this is how I've been developed. And so I'm able to now work towards maintaining my emotion center and my thought processing center to maybe go, you know what, I think jumping off the bridge, into the water down below might not be a good idea. Whereas to the teenager, hey, that was a cool video I saw on YouTube. Let's do it. And next thing
Hmm.
you know, they've just made the worst decision of their life because they didn't see the rocks at the bottom of the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair. So, but here I was talking about your feelings, your unhappy thoughts and feelings, like in a bid to appear happy online or even among friends. Like, what sort of effect does this have on their emotional state? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say from an emotional state, I
Yeah.
think you nailed it with your one word,
Mm-hmm.
happiness. The
Mm-hmm.
issue with happiness is a lot of, depending what research you do in that area, a lot of individuals, the one I like to pick on, I think I mentioned to you as well, I sent you a link, was Dr. Sue or Susan Johnson. All right.
Yes.
And I would say, based on the research and materials that she even has done, the issues with that is that it leads to a very surface secondary emotion. Happiness is viewed by many as a secondary emotion, whereas a primary emotion is joy. So an example would be, I don't know, the birth of a child. It's like, wow, new person, new life. I'm the dad. Wow, I have such joy in my heart for this child. I will do everything I can to the best of my ability, knowing I'm going to make mistakes, but to the best of my ability, I have such joy for my child. And that's lasting, hopefully lasting throughout till they become, even through the crazy teenage years, to an adult and so forth. Happiness is oh man, Mexico was so awesome, man. I loved it. And now I got back last Friday and oh my gosh, it's so cold. Man, I'm so miserable. This sucks. Well, happiness is fleeting. It's a secondary emotion. So it's a fleeting emotion. Social media in general, is a very happy place to be in for secondary emotions, but it doesn't build upon primary root emotions like joy. So that's
Yeah.
a concern of mine.
Yes. That's a very good insight. Yeah. With this suppression also comes the fear of being vulnerable because young people know that they would be evaluated and judged for their social media activities. Do you think this causes young people to become even more careful and thus more sheltered in their actual lives as well as online lives?
I think part of that depends on their development.
Uh huh.
Because if they're still developing, as I mentioned, if that part of the brain is still developing, even if they have good intentions, there's still a possibility for them to make an impulsive choice to put a picture that they are going to regret later on. Whereas if they were 30, I'm not putting that picture on. Are you kidding me?
Hmm.
That's crazy. What was I thinking? We all make mistakes, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. But that teenage brain, absolutely. And so what can happen is things will happen without recognizing the consequence until afterwards. And that's when the issue comes into play, where that can then definitely reinforce that negative emotion, that negative, all the different feelings that a person's dealing with, which then reinforces that anxiety, that social anxiety, especially if after that, now they're being cyberbullied. Now it's, hey, look, your stupid video you made. You're now on YouTube and you've had 1 million hits. Great.
Hmm.
You know?
Yes. I get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does this, if like, okay, you've answered that. You've answered that. Like, how does it factor in with social anxiety? You mentioned how it all comes down to that. So you must be familiar. Are you familiar with the term FOMO, the fear of missing out?
Yeah, I looked it up because when you said the fact, I was like, oh, well, there we go. I finally figured out LOL, a year or two ago, you know. But I was like, oh, sure, what's this? So I looked up the
Okay.
Urban Dictionary. I'm like, oh, fear, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, from a young person, even old, even taking the age thing out, there's always a sense of wanting some form of relationship. We are wired, we are created for relationship. And social media creates, again, kind of like when I talked about that secondary versus primary emotion, it's almost like a secondary relationship. It's not a primary relationship. So it could very easily, I could see how that would lead into an ongoing sense of fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
What a terrible way to live. Rather than going, you know what, I choose not to go to that because I'm tired or I have homework, or I just actually am choosing not to go there because that's actually not a good social influence on my life. I'm choosing other directions. I need some my own healthy isolation time. But instead, I have to go to that party. If I miss out, I'm not cool. I'm not popular. Oh, look, everyone else was there and I wasn't invited. Hmm, that's not healthy at all. So absolutely it does.
Yes. Okay. And how closely do you think this feeling is linked to social anxiety? Do you feel the excessive use of social media exacerbates these feelings of missing out?
Yeah, again, it's a neutral. It's going to depend on the individual. If
All
they're
right.
already dealing with that, it just reinforces it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely there's enough. Social media has proven to be enough of an influence that even those who say they don't deal with it, how come you're still on your phone? So can you get off? Can you get off for even a day without being on social media? So that's kind of the litmus test, I call it.
Yes.
A lot of times January is a time where a lot of people even within different religions will take a time of fasting. And my thing is this: when was the last time you fasted from social media for even 24 hours? If you can't deal with it, if you can't be on your phone for even more than 2, 3 hours, you got a problem.
Of course.
So that's affecting your life. It is a direct influence on your life.
Yes. That's true. That's true. Do you believe that excessive social media usage and consumption causes young people to fixate and dwell over the amount of engagement, for instance, likes, shares, and comments that their posts receive? Do they
Yeah.
dwell on them a lot?
Again, developmentally, especially for anyone 24 years or under,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And if they've been in that culture and now they're 25, 26, it's just part of their life now. And if it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been dealt with, absolutely, it continues to reinforce that because that's now just part of a pattern. And that's the challenge that we're going to face. It's kind of my polite way of saying, thanks, social media. I still have a job for the next 20 years because there's going to be some long term emotional ramifications that I get to deal with and other therapists with all of what's happening with what we're talking about today.
Yes, of course, of course. How is the individual's ability to focus or concentrate affected by FOMO and excessive social media usage?
Hmm. Gonna have to say that again.
Yeah, of course. Like, how is an individual's ability to focus and concentrate affected by the fear of missing out and excessive social media usage?
Oh yeah, sure. Because yeah, that makes sense now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does affect it in the way that all of that energy is being utilized towards on something that is a surface, or if we want to call it a secondary emotion, rather than focusing on themselves and finding things that are actually effective, that work well with them, that help them grow, lead them to maturity. And without that, you're just left with a very shallow life, and how you're living. So it absolutely affects it that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. There is also a theory of a dopamine effect that a person receives every time the social media post gets a form of engagement. How accurate do you think that is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I believe it.
Yeah.
Dopamine, the receptor, it's a pleasure center,
Uh-huh.
and that's the issue. Again, going from a developmental perspective, specifically the teenage years, that part, which is all emotional base, is connected to the dopamine area. Okay. And so with that, it's a constant reinforcement of pleasure, 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 pleasure. And at the end of the day, if I don't have that, that's actually where addiction comes from. If you look at studies with like cocaine addicts,
Mm-hmm.
that dopamine is just to the roof. And that's why when a person's coming off an addiction like cocaine, um, yeah, like that, that's where
Yeah.
you get really grumpy. You have no emotional control because you're just having, it's just harder to maintain that because you don't have a coping skill. Whereas all my pain and hurts are coped with a shallow secondary device known as social media. It's interesting that one of my older, oh gosh, I'm going like 15 years ago or whatever.
All right.
I've got one of my favorite pictures that I have is one half you have the brain that has a picture of someone on cocaine. And then you have someone else on this side, the picture with someone who has an addiction to pornography. They look the same because those dopamine centers are skyrocketed to the max. And whether it's pornography, whether it's a social media, just eye candy, whatever you want to call it, we're going to start seeing more and more of that effect. And if you take that away, oh, what do? You have no grasp. And if you're already dealing with social anxiety, if you're dealing with traumas, hurts, past pain, add on top of it the social media, that is a huge cocktail of scariness. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yes, no, that's very accurate. And like you've sort of answered my next question as well, which was like, how does this affect them emotionally, the people who are going through this?
Yeah,
This like,
yeah,
if they when they don't receive the amount of engagement that they expect, what effect does that happen? And so
yeah.
you've answered that. So
Yeah. And I'll
yes,
just add to that
yeah,
specifically.
of course.
If they continue with that, if they do not have a way to cope with their anxiety or whatever they're dealing with,
Hmm.
all the social media will do is reinforce that self-negative belief within them at their core being, which means they just keep going around this vicious cycle over and over again.
Yes, of course, of course. Do you think that the fear of rejection, being left behind or forgotten, is stronger now more than ever because of the excessive usage and prevalence of social media?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's because it's because it's a false sense of community connection.
Yes, yes,
And so out of that, I may not have had that as much in the 70s or 80s because I'm with people, I'm not with people, whereas this, you're always with people, but it's a
exactly.
secondary I'm with people, not a primary face to face. This is a secondary communication. Although we're communicating,
Yes,
I still am not with you. I'm not sensing. I'm not, not to be graphic, but we're not smelling each other. We're not, all that kind of stuff. I don't the environment,
yeah,
that kind of thing. The screen you're seeing is my roof. You're not seeing the rest of my, my little office area,
yeah,
that kind of stuff.
yeah, of
That
course.
changes perception and everything with that.
It
So
does.
yes.
Of course, of course. So sitting behind a screen can offer a sense or feeling of safety to an individual with social anxiety, giving them the confidence to express themselves better. Do you agree with this statement and why?
Hmm.
Like sitting behind the screen, offering a sense of security, and it sort of boosts their confidence somehow. Do you agree
Yeah.
with that, or do
I
you?
would say from a therapeutic perspective,
Hmm.
my observation has been that, again, social media from a neutral perspective, not saying it's right or wrong,
Uh-huh.
just because we talked a lot about consequences. But if someone is dealing with legitimate social anxiety, this very well could be a way to begin breaking those barriers down if it's used intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, with a purpose to be able to then deal with, from going back to the first question, as far as social anxiety being with people, that anxiousness, this could be that next step towards. So this is more of a environmental connection that we're having, but then that actual next step, if I were to drive up to Edmonton and meet you and have a physical social interaction, that's a whole nother level. Here, I don't have to worry about it. I can make
Yeah.
faces at you. And, well, I mean, you know where I work, but beyond that, it's like, I'm not worried about it. I
Yeah.
may never hear of you or see you again after this. So,
Of course. Yeah.
so that takes that fear away in some regards.
That's true.
That can be, again, a good and bad thing,
Yeah.
but yes, and in some regards, there are certain therapies as well that will actually use a lot of visualization process. So, for example, if I'm dealing with someone with trauma, oftentimes I'll use certain techniques where they're visualizing themselves behind, let's say, like a glass screen door. See your event. It's too much for them to handle. Well, let's put a barrier up in front of you. It's a glass window. It's bulletproof. No one's going to harm you. Now they're able to then safely tell what that trauma was and process it through, as one example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, absolutely, I could see that being utilized with intention for good.
Okay. Yeah. That's fair. So, do you think this is a good sign for socially anxious individuals, or does it reinforce their fear and avoidance of real life interactions?
Oh yeah, I think it's a bad thing. I think there definitely needs to be more control. There needs to be more influence, ultimately from parents, uh, just as guilty by the ways.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, that's the sad part. That if we get to a point where we recognize that as a society and make choices, I think it very well could be a little bit of too little, too late. But it will be interesting to see this particular generation, from those who are around, I'll say 23 and under. It'll be interesting as they get married, as kids who are 12, 20 years from now get married, have their kids. It will be interesting to see if there'll be shifts or change, even within legislation, within what is allowed, what's not allowed. I don't know.
Yes.
Time will tell. So the futurist in me is going probably not, but because most people don't even know how to parent their own kids, let alone deal with social media on top of it.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, yeah, it's too good of a babysitter these days.
That's very true. Um, what does this excessive social media prevalence mean for peer-to-peer interaction, as it is and as it will evolve in the future? Like you just mentioned, like physical interaction, and like what do you see for that as it is and how it will evolve in the future?
Yeah, I think we'll see both positive and negative.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I, I'm reminded of, actually, there's a book by a guy called Arthur C. Clarke. It's called 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Uh-huh.
He himself was a futurist. The book was written, I think, in 69, 68 or something like that. And it's interesting. In that book, he actually futurized um, communication. Now, in that day, it was the tele or the telephone and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
he envisioned a time where everyone could see each other like this, but from a phone standpoint. What he
Mm-hmm.
didn't see was how it would change. And so those are some of the interesting things. So yeah, if I have a loved one that I grew up with, or if I have to, let's say, go to Saskatchewan, the middle of nowhere, and do a conference, the advantage is I can still call my loved ones and go, hey, how are you doing? At least have some form of facial rather than just verbal. Or the old, even before that, it was the letter, dearest Gwyneth, I miss thee thou,
Mm-hmm.
those kind of situations,
Yeah.
and that's better than nothing. But for some, this is better than even a letter and stuff like that. But it is interesting when you also look back at just the letter days, how influential one single letter could be for a family or an individual,
Of
rather
course.
than just constant, whenever I can get it, if I can get it, connection and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's very true. Um, You have sort of touched upon it before, but I would somehow ask you this again. Like,
Sure,
could
sure.
excessive social media usage be considered an addiction? If yes, how?
Yeah, it's an addiction if the person is unable to close the screen, walk away from it. If the person is being influenced by other individuals or social media to do actions that are not of their own choice of what they would do if they really wanted, if they really had time to think about it, such as cyberbullying, such as, hey man, everyone's doing this cool new thing. What's the newest thing well, it's not new anymore, but it was the whole hold your breath and push someone against the wall, and basically cause them to be unconscious or something like that.
Oh,
You
okay.
know, thanks to social media, thousands of schools are now having to ban even the mention of that practice because kids are doing it. Whether it's cool or not cool, it is extremely unsafe. It causes brain hemorrhaging, can cause brain hemorrhaging, and brain damage. But
Mm-hmm.
because of the coolness of social media, we've had it happen already, and it never would have happened if we hadn't have had social media. You
Of course.
know, flip side of the coin too. Consequentially, I deal with after ramifications of people
Yeah.
who do too much social media.
Uh-huh.
I had an emotional affair on my husband, my wife, pornography, not able to let it go. It's beyond just social media. It can create stalking. I use Facebook or different sites, different social media sites can be utilized as what I call a seeking out behavior. So if I'm thinking of using, if I'm thinking of possibly whatever it is, it can create a seeking out behavior where no, I'm not watching pornography. Yeah, but you happen to be seeing if you're, that girl from high school is in a swimsuit or not. That's seeking behavior. That's not healthy. So it doesn't help in that way.
Of course. No.
Yeah, and I would call that an addiction then, if
Yes.
you're not able to let it go.
Of course. So, keeping our discussion in mind, do you think it is possible for a young person to cut ties with social media, especially if their mental health is being affected? Please elaborate on that.
I would love to say yes, but the
Mm-hmm.
reality is right now that's not going to happen. So I believe that is where in a utopian world, in a perfect world, that is the parent's responsibility to help guide and morally support them to know and recognize what should be watched, what shouldn't be watched, how much time is limit, how much time they're not on it, what are the limits, even as simple as when we're at the dinner table, no cell phones allowed. Put it on the counter. We're going to eat as a family for a half hour, even if we fight or don't fight, but
Yeah.
no social media, those kind of concepts, not allowing your 12-year-old child to text their BFF at 2 p.m. in the morning or 2 a.m. in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
What? No. Now, the flip side of that, if it's an issue of safety, absolutely. But those are rare and extreme cases that have to be utilized and understood. But
Of
that
course.
has to be done within checks and balances.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Even the way you mentioned, like baby, like social media acting as a babysitter, right? Like children are literally growing up with them, like with an iPad in their hand. They refuse to eat without having an iPad screen in front of them,
Right.
and it's like that's how children are being raised right now. So yeah, it's just it causes it raises a lot of questions as to
Sure.
what's happening here. But yeah, look, I'll get back to the questions. Um,
Well, actually, I'm just going to interject on that
yeah,
because
please.
that is a good point.
Yes.
I would say it's just again, it's the consequences of those choices that have happened in parenting.
Mm,
Nowadays, it's the tablet. I'm not going to eat if I don't have my tablet.
yeah.
Well, it just means some parenting needs to happen. It's not about the kid. It's actually
That,
about the parent now. Same thing happened when TV came into our world, whatever, 50, 60 years ago. Same thing happened when movies came onto screen 100 years ago. And so we've just seen different levels of complexity of that situation. But it's not new, it's just
mhm.
more accessible.
Yes, exactly. That's the point. It's just in your face right now. Like it's very
Exactly.
much accessible. Everybody has access to it.
And it creates, again, isolation within
Exactly.
a social context.
It does. It does. So, what measures, in your professional opinion, can be taken to break the cycle of excessive social media usage in a bid to lessen or alleviate social anxiety? What
Yeah.
sort of measures can somebody take?
Yeah, I think easier said than done, obviously, but obviously it's always looking at the different directions. Parentally, the parent needs to, even beyond just banning social media at 11 a.m., it's teaching the reasons, the whys of the reasons how we're going to effectively do this. So the child knows what to do when they're encountering different situations. So there's an educational component. There's also demonstration. I mean, it's the typical parent who's like, son or daughter, get off your phone. Yeah, but mom, you've been on your phone for the last 4 hours.
Yeah,
Well, they are only going to imitate what they're seeing as well.
yeah,
Okay. I think schools have done the right thing, and I think they're still struggling and working through it from my observation. But good on them for, I know the school where my kids go to, there is unless it's an emergency, unless it's before or after school, you are not allowed on your cell phone. They have a policy. If we catch you with your phone, you get one warning, otherwise it's gone. Well, they haven't had any incidences yet, so that's enough to scare a kid. So guess what? It's not as bad as you think sometimes.
uh-huh,
It's just the boundaries haven't been in there. Healthy boundaries are
yes,
not put in place. You know what I mean? I
yeah,
think practically things like no texting while you drive are other areas that have helped out, but that leads to be further enforcement as well, um, to support things. It's amazing. Everyone knows about pornography, and yet there is no ban on it. It is unbelievable. You have to order it even on cable. You might occasionally see something on TV, but compared to what's out on the internet, it is out of control. Where's the ban? Where's the control on that? So that the 7-year-old is not accidentally popping on something. And just so you know, those who are on YouTube, I've been on stuff and it's like, what the heck? I thought this was, what's the parental? There's no parental control.
yeah,
Now that's just a visual thing. That's not even talking about violence. That's not talking about areas of language. That's
yeah,
not talking about emotional projection of attitudes that are influencing our culture. Oh my gosh. So we have to start at the root. Individually, what am I going to do about it? What do I need help with it as an individual? And how can I influence others, specifically, first and foremost, my family, and then my community, and so forth.
yes. That's a very good answer. Yeah. Um, you touched upon it a little before, like, and it's again out of the blue here. But how much do you think that the fact that every internet post is permanent in some way or the other plays a part in the formation and or exacerbation of social anxiety in young people? Just the fact that once you post something online, it just stays there, right? Even if you delete it, it'll be there in some form or another. Like
Yeah.
somebody can screenshot it and it's there for the rest of eternity, for instance.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a terrible tragedy, especially when you understand, again, using teenagers
Hmm.
in development of with the lack of self control and impulsively putting something that they're going to regret later on. The social and consequences of that later on in life can potentially be devastating. And so where's the legislation to protect minors from making mistakes like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
To be able to go, no, we have to do that. But that's just the reality. Again, that's where parents have to, I don't even, and in some regards, I don't even think people realize or want to realize or admit how long permanently this stuff is. There's always an image or a secondary something elsewhere. But
Yes.
people don't know that. So it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. I won't make it. Well, until our next prime minister someday decides to become a prime minister, and because of what they did when they were 17 or 21 comes out in social media, and
Yeah.
it's like, well, there's a smear campaign.
Yeah.
Next person we have to try to get into election.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
it's very unfortunate that way.
Yeah. So does this like again does this like exacerbate social anxiety in people as well? Do
Yeah,
you think?
I would
Yeah.
say, yeah. And it's not even that, it exacerbates long-term social anxiety as well, because it's not that I'm going to you directly saying, you know what, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, let's move on, we reconcile. Those kind of situations, um, it's still there.
Hmm.
And it can haunt you. And it just makes the work I do in a person's life, it can create a little more of a lingering challenge to be able to deal with it. If someone dies, with all due respect, they're dead. Now, I will still support them with grief and loss, work through that stuff, whether it was issues of bitterness that they never, stuff they never reconciled. I wish I had said this to my dad, but I didn't,
Yeah.
those kind of things. Or I loved my dad and man, I just miss him so much and I can't get over it. Okay, we'll work through that, but there's a finality in it. I'm finding it is easier, for example, using social media as an example, it's easier to counsel a family who has had a physical affair on their partner than someone who's had an emotional affair or a pornographic affair, as it were, because it's never done.
Yeah. Yep.
It's not concluded. All right, you did the act, you messed up, we're gonna have to work through it. It hurt, and it's still there. It might linger in the memory, I call it, but it's done. But man, that picture is there forever. So again, it's not that it's new, but the consequences are becoming more rampant and it's more available to people, unlike where we just focused on politicians 40, 50 years ago with the snapshot of
Yeah.
the senator with the bad girl,
Yeah.
those kind of things. Now it's just, that's the whole thing with, what was that called? It's the Have an Affair site. Oh, I'm blanking out on the name, but it creates emotional affairs which have longer, more difficult consequences to bring healing of in the work I do, is what I'm trying to say. So,
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So, like, this brings me to my last question
Okay.
for this interview, which is like in today's world where social media is so deeply integrated in young people's lives, is it practical to idealize a life without it or learn to live better with social media?
Again, from a neutral social media, being a neutral perspective, it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing today without it.
Yes,
But mind you, without it, you wouldn't have your topic either for your thesis, right?
that's
There's
true.
the bitter irony.
Yeah, that's true.
There's
That's
your
true.
thesis title, bitter irony.
That's
But at
right.
the end of yeah. So again, we can use it, but we are now legitimately not just thinking of it, knowing it, but ignoring it. We're now actually seeing the consequences of social anxiety within our young people today regarding the issues specifically with social media in your case. And so definitely we have to make positive changes. We have to make influence for change that will affect our generation and the generations to come in order to create a healthy lifestyle that does not control our life, but enhances our life. But as always, way easier said than done.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
So again, like, thank you for your time, taking out time and like talking to me. It's
You
again,
bet.
it's very, it's invaluable information, really. So thank
Oh,
you.
good. I'm glad I could help. Glad
Yeah.
I could help. All right, Mohammed, all the best to you and your thesis and your projects upcoming,
Thank you.
okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Take care yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care.
Goodbye.
All right, bye.
Bye.